Hello, Config APAC. What a day, what a day. I am thrilled to be here with Kunal Shah, the founder and CEO of CRED. If you don't know CRED, it is a financial community platform for the top 1% in India that incentivizes strong financial behavior. He can talk to us a little bit more about that. He's the second or third time founder? Second time founder, third time founder.
It doesn't matter after the first one.
Sold his previous company, lose track. Sold his previous company to Axis Bank in 2017. In addition to being a repeat founder, he's also a prolific angel investor, and I've heard from his friends and colleagues that I think he has invested in every successful Indian startup that exists. He can tell us if that's true or not. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with Kunal. He is not only a CEO and founder, he is a philosopher, a product thinker, and a podcaster. So, welcome to Config.
Thank you so much for having me.
The group gathered here today spans disciplines across product building. And so where I thought we could start is one of the things I was most fascinated to learn about you, which is your Delta 4 framework for product building. So tell the audience a little bit about it.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be here. It's great to see this large of a community focused on product design and all things that we love creating. Delta 4 framework was something that I came up with somewhere in 2017, more as a realization that I was the only non-tech founder in the tech ecosystem with the largest exit. So nothing was making sense to me that how could I be successful and a lot of smart people are not successful. So I thought about this framework, and between my startups, I was thinking about reading more physics and evolutionary biology, and I was trying to mix all these concepts in my head. So Delta 4 framework was very a simple framework on predicting how to know if your startup is going to be successful or not. And it's simplistic, but it kind of eliminates at least 90% of failures of doing that. So the right way to think about it is, if I asked folks that, can you think about any product or service that was more efficient 10 years ago? Can you come up with an answer? I'm curious to know if anybody has an answer. Any product or service that was more efficient 10 years ago than it is today? Any answers?
No.
It's easier when you contrast it for, say, 50 years and say, was there anything more efficient in the 50 years? And we'll not find it. So we have to assume that all the efficiency exists in the future, right? When we experience magic, when we experience AI, when we experience a great product, what we are experiencing is something become dramatically more efficient. So if you think about that, and if you compare products, for example, you worked at Uber, and if I compare, let's say, taking taxis in San Francisco in a regular way that existed before, and taking an Uber, and you compare score of efficiency on 10, what would you score taking that versus Uber? Like, give me a score on 10. What would it be?
Taxi versus Uber, or Uber versus taxi?
Both. Give me a score on efficiency for taxi and efficiency score on 10 for Uber.
Very low on taxi. Can't get one, can't pay credit card. I'll give it a 3.
3, okay. And Uber would be?
10 out of 10, of course.
Okay. So whenever you notice that the delta between the two is greater than or equal to 4, you see 3 things happen. One is, it is usually an irreversible behavior. When we experience Delta 4 products, we cannot go back. That's basically how humanity functions. When we discover Delta 4, we just stay there. Number 2, we have very high tolerance for it. Just because your Uber is late, you're not like, shit, I'm canceling and just getting a regular taxi. You will not do that. And the third thing is that it usually causes UBP, which is unique brag-worthy proposition, which means when humans discover a Delta 4 product, they can't stop bragging about it, right? So Uber, how many of you got to, let's say, a Grab or an Uber back in the day in in respective countries that you come from through watching an ad? Please raise your hand. Yeah, 2. And how many of you got onto the app because some friend told you, oh my God, look at this app and there's a demo. How many of you got through that? Yeah, most of you. So I think that's what is unique brag-worthy proposition, and I'm sure every one of you also bragged about it further. But it's not always Delta 4. For example, if I told you, can you give me a rating of buying a top offline and buying a top online on a score of 10, what would you give the scores on both of them?
Offline, I don't know, they're close. Depends.
Yeah.
One you can get in your hand right away. It's a tough one.
So
What would you say?
it depends. If it was someone like me with all the fluctuating weight that I have, it's very hard. So I would say it's actually reverse. Sometimes offline is better than online.
Yeah, can be.
And therefore, when the delta is not great, sometimes it's negative. Even if it's a tech product, it doesn't make things more efficient. And therefore, a lot of startups fail because they take an idea that just works fine and try to put tech into it, but it's not made things efficient. It actually made it inefficient, right? And therefore, a lot of times when delta is not greater than or equal to 4, we have zero tolerance. Like we'll go back to the old behavior, like, oh my God, they shipped something terrible. I'll go back and buy it from the shop. And it's not like offline retail shops have not gone away, but the offline taxis have gone away quite a bit in most cities. So I think it's like evolution of species in some ways. So if you create a Delta 4 product, it usually takes over the previous species and creates a new species out of it. So that's like a gist of what it is, but it's a longer concept, maybe for some other day.
Love it. I will say the taxis are very efficient here in Singapore. Thank you, Singapore. You talked at the beginning of your framework about how you came to it, because you said, I was a non-tech founder. You did study humanities, you studied philosophy. How has that informed your journey and piped into your philosophy for product building? And I know you've talked about how it's certainly, as part of your identity, something that made you feel different from the others in the founder and CEO community.
I think what philosophy does is teaches you two things. One is it makes you see things from many, many lenses, right? Which unfortunately let's say our current education system or more STEM-based education system kind of tries to deduce everything logically in a very, let's say, one-dimensional lens. But human behavior is complex. To just be able to say, oh, why did this person do this? You cannot just give one answer to it, right? And usually that answer may not be right for most people. So it's important to be able to give multiple lenses to it, and I think philosophy just gives you that discipline to do that, and not feel the need to jump to conclusions, which is a sort of in the world that we live in right now, like everybody is watching a short video on TikTok and have great knowledge about everything, which is this shallow. Philosophy teaches you to kind of go deeper. The second thing it makes you become better at is just be very curious about wide range of topics, right? Well, the word philosophy comes from philo plus sophy, which means love for knowledge. And I think if you just are widely curious, it allows you to connect dots that most people cannot connect. And which is almost a superpower in the world that we live in right now, where most people are like addicted to systems that they are part of and kind of getting limited in their worldview in general.
Actually, that's a good segue into talking about your design philosophy at CRED and the way people feel those constraints. So I had the chance to meet the head of design for CRED at Config in San Francisco, and we were chatting a little bit. We started talking about design constraints, which is something I know everyone in this room thinks about as part of your practice. And he shared that you don't believe in constraints at the outset of design. Talk a little bit about that and how it informs the design discipline within CRED.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, especially in a country like India or generally Southeast Asia or South Asia, is we have a natural reluctance for being audacious. is a society that is a lot more compliant and a lot more, let's say, disciplined in general. So what happens is that our thinking is rarely with some very radical ideas. You rarely see extraordinarily original ideas come from this part of the world going to the West. You will see many startups that have copied the ideas from the West and then put it in our nation. I think that part, and design to me is this great place to absolutely, you have the blank canvas to kind of really go think big. And the reason we tell our team to think without constraints right now and say, imagine if this was to be designed and you had to put it on stage and really feel proud of demoing it, what would you build, right? And then obviously constraints come in everything in life. And you put the constraints later versus constraints first. But I think one of the principles that we've done is actually many of our key leaders at CRED, not just design, actually have a background in performance art.
Really?
The reason is that...
performance art.
Yeah, the reason is that so many of them are singers, DJs, musicians, poets, all sorts of people. The reason is, or stand-up comedians, because they are naturally wired to build products for the applause of the audience versus applause of the boss. So I think it's an interesting thing that if you hire people like that, they're naturally wired to know what will cause an applause, and therefore they have a very different dimension and lens to look at things.
There may be some in this audience who are pushed to work for the applause of their boss. What advice do you have for them, for these product builders, for designers, to manifest and channel that bigger thinking, even if it's potentially not as present in their specific work culture right now?
One tactical advice is start with logo being small and then eventually make it big when they tell you. Just kidding. But I would say that you have to understand that not everybody is gifted to appreciate beauty. And it is almost an obligation that all of you have to make people feel and realize that. It is not something that is innate to most people. And some things that is innate to you guys, for example, I have a natural OCD to see symmetry and not see symmetry, and I can have like heated debates on knowing that something is not well aligned, and I win those things because I'm just naturally inclined to see it. Most people can't see anything wrong in absolutely misaligned stuff, and they just see it's perfect. And I think it is, design is an obligation. It's an obligation towards your team, your craft, to your customers, to people who are going to see it. And the pride should come from here on what you are building. And the good thing is that when people see that craft and pride, we all appreciate it, no matter who we are, what our designations are. It means many of you have seen great artists perform live. There is something mesmerizing about great art. We all watch it. Same thing for great sport. When you see it live, you will see that this is absolutely some work of art being going on over here. So I think I would say that you should raise your standards to the level that people feel excellence around you, and automatically you'll be able to shape the world around you in that way. And just know that not everybody has the luxury to know things the way you see it, and therefore you have to just be persistent sometimes. But best is to always demonstrate, and people, when they experience something better, they always want something better. It's just that sometimes many of us are not great at explaining our viewpoint and kind of storytell what we are seeing. And I can tell you that world we are living in right now, where nobody has any attention span left, unless you have extraordinary storytelling skills, nobody's got time for that. So they're going to move on.
We have a new product to help you all with that, Figma slides, for your storytelling. Let's push on that a little bit, because you talk about in your public discourse the difference between learning by doing and learning by training. What do you see as the difference in the muscles that get developed between those two? Which are you, first, to start? And do you think it's possible for people to go back and forth? Is one better than the other for the discipline that this audience is in?
I think a ratio of both needs to exist for getting anything big done in general. I think learning by doing is great if you have great feedback loops, or you have extraordinary ability to take feedback from somebody who's better than you. Most people, unfortunately, what I see, at least in the younger audience, is that their ability to take feedback has dramatically gone down. And that comes from them assuming that they have a lot of reputation before they have built any substance in life. And I think if we can change that mindset to be not a feedback repeller, but a feedback attractor, our iteration cycles will improve and our product will, and our craft will show that, right? And sometimes that phase of zooming in, zooming out is what creates extraordinary outcomes. But if you notice people who are excellent, they're usually having very fast iteration cycles. And they have extraordinary ability to seek and get feedback from people who are dramatically better than them. And it's interesting, people who are actually better than you also like to give feedback to people who they see potential in. Otherwise, people are like, oh, you do you, and move on, right? They don't want to bother you and change your thinking too much. So I think the right way to think about life is appreciate presence of these folks and look forward to critical feedback and then do stuff. Because if you do stuff and do not take critical feedback and seek it, you're unlikely to learn anything from doing.
How does that inform how you structure your product building teams at CRED or in your prior startups? Does it?
Yeah, I think what we've
flow
done,
from there?
yeah, what we've done is like not try to have too many strict rules around who does what, but we have a strict rule on when it comes to when we are ready for a demo for a larger team to see, we should be extremely proud of what we have shipped or what we have built. And I think that allows multiple people to shine in different ways, right? There's a role for marketing team in it, there's a role for product team in it, there's a role for engineering team in it, there's a role for a design team in it. And if you've built a product that is likely to make people take notice, give you an applause, then it doesn't matter who did what. And I think therefore what we structure for is, let's say applause backwards or let's say magic backwards. And keep it loose otherwise. Because if we say, oh, design has to listen to product and product has to listen to design and all these rules, just eventually you get to a point where it doesn't work. But if you say that, oh my God, when we do a demo, it should feel great. When we take it out for people, will they appreciate it? What will people talk about? What do we want people to talk about? If you think about those things more than how the teams are structured, I think the outcomes get better. And usually smaller teams work better. All this nonsense of team structuring, all that comes in when you have large teams. Always optimize for having smaller teams because they usually figure it out. You can send them on a vacation for a week and they'll solve it and come back.
That's good advice too. I've been lucky to work with two amazing founders in my career, tech founders. We're getting a feel for it through this conversation, but talk a little bit about what you're like as a founder, because it's so much of an imprint on a company's heartbeat, identity, culture. How do you think about the founder inside you and how that manifests at CRED and your other companies?
It's hard for me to really answer this question. I think probably people who worked with me can probably answer this better, but I think we do have a concept of believing in values that we have. For example, we have set of values that we interview people basis values, we do appraisal, we do promotion basis values and not just performance. Performance actually matters less compared to values that we have. And I think if you think about values, values are what makes us become more long-term in life, right? Otherwise, there's no difference between us and animals in some ways, right? Only through values we become more long-term. And I believe that we like to make choices that are more long-term than others. Let's think about a simple example. All of us can tweet, but what if we had a framework that let's only tweet stuff that will be relevant even if you read 5 years later? Suddenly you will not tweet 90% of stuff that you're tweeting. A lot of people like to be topical and chase things and be capturing the moment and try to be relevant, and it creates more anxious behavior versus long-term behavior. And I think if you just operate with more long-term principles, so I would say I just operate with more long-term thinking around choices, people, design principles, product choices, how do we monetize, all of these are thought from a much more long-term perspective. And ideally try to think that why do only some companies become an institution? Most companies don't. And if you think about those properties, suddenly you will make very, very different choices.
Being a founder also takes a tremendous amount of resilience, especially when you've done it more than once. Talk a little bit about how you have found resilience now in this chapter of your life as a founder, but also earlier in your personal life, if you're open to doing that.
I didn't have much privilege to start with, right? I started my journey, the family went through a financial crisis when I was 13, 14, 15. I was doing a full-time job of a delivery boy and a data entry operator when I was 15, 16. So life has been constantly about trying to survive and solve problems. A founder is basically somebody who absorbs all the uncertainty and provides certainty to employees, to investors, to customers. So being a founder is very hard because you're almost the single person who's absorbing all the uncertainty. So I think the concept of resilience around is almost a given. You will not survive this. How many of you are founders over here? Curious? Okay.
Uncertainty absorbers.
Yeah, so a lot of people have this exciting thing about, oh, this is a founder, I would like to be a founder someday. It only looks sexy from outside. It is extremely painful.
Yes.
Because imagine you might be going through a rough time and you have a bad quarter or a bad product shipping, but the employees will expect their salary. Nobody's going to say, oh shit, we had a terrible quarter, we could not ship the product well, so this month, this quarter will not take our salary. It's not going to happen. Neither will investors will say, oh my God, oh, you had a rough time, you were injured, so I understand this quarter was not great. Nobody's going to care about that. So I think that makes it hard. And I think being resilient is all about, irrespective of the circumstances, you're coming out stronger every time. In fact, coming out stronger when there is more chaos is what you will see in extraordinary founders or generally highly resilient people. But resilience has an important component, which is sometimes you have to manifest crisis to build the muscle of resilience. Unfortunately, many of us are in environments where we've never been gifted crisis. Especially if you've had successful parents, they ensured that you didn't meet many of the crises at all in your life, which creates a unique problem that when they really come in your life, you're not well prepared to handle it, or it's easy to dodge them. And worst case scenario, your parents will still take care of you. But many people in the world have not had this luxury. Like if they don't survive, they don't survive.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times we forget that, like a lot of the privileges that we have today in our world, where a lot of the basics have been taken care of, deprives the hunger that is required to create extraordinary outcomes.
Has that informed your work now at CRED in particular, in terms of, you talked about the financial crisis in your family, your platform today rewards, strong financial choices and behavior?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
It was something that I always wanted to do, uh, uh, and this startup was a good place to do that because a lot of times people assume that we all are naturally good at understanding what good financial behavior is, but we always have some misbehavior that kind of causes disruption. And in our case, like early bankruptcy in the family obviously made me realize that the value of good financial behavior is important not just for you, for your entire family. And I think it is very common to be punished for a bad behavior. For example, if you miss a few credit card bills, you know what's going to happen, right? But we wanted to create the positive reinforcement of demonstrating good financial behavior. If you paid consistently for last 10 years your credit card bill on time, nobody's even told you great job. Forget about giving a reward on top of that. So I think we wanted to recognize that so that more people wish for that, desire that, and ultimately there are lots of second order effects that come from that. For example, in the US, it's very common that people are, you would not be able to rent an apartment if you do not have a good credit score. Most parts of Asia, this is not tested. Most people don't even know what their credit score is. So I think we are slowly learning that, and I think we wanted to just incentivize. We are not in the business of punishing people, but
Right.
incentivizing them.
And how did you do that through design with CRED? Or
Yeah.
did you test different solutions to see what would work? I know that you love to think about the user psyche as you build products and design them.
So we are slightly different about this. We don't really do too much of A/B testing into what we want to do in life, including what we launch as CRED. But we take a long time to build conviction about something and then really go with it. So our design philosophy is not be anxious A/B tester, but really think through something and really go with it, and have a very high judgment, right? So, and it's easy to say. It's taken a lot of years of failing to get to this point in life, but we like to bring people who demonstrate good judgment versus, oh, I'm going to launch this and launch these 3 versions and 5 versions and 6 versions and see what works. Nothing life-changing in the world has happened through A/B experiments. And therefore, I think that culture doesn't create strong gut feelings in people.
Intuition.
And it almost makes you feel that always there's an escape path to things, right? But plan B is always a distraction, right? And you have to just operate with that mindset. When it comes to our way of shipping stuff, we obsess about design. We have found that great design creates trust. A well-crafted experience feels like it is stable and solid. And a lot of times people just take the shortcuts and say, oh, let's just call it an MVP and ship it. But I don't think the customers really care what were your constraints, especially when it comes to financial transactions. Nobody wants to put their credit card and do a large value transaction on something that looks like an MVP.
No.
So I think a lot of times we take a lot of these things for granted, and we also overestimate that just making a product better is going to take sometimes just a few more days versus trying to find an escape into let's do something hacky. I think if you want to create trust, you can't be shipping hacky products.
Yeah. Plan B, no plan Bs. I like that. I think you can apply that to a lot in life. Okay, we're going to take it to philosophy now. You, I understand, are quite obsessed with the idea of entropy and order and disorder. How does that inform your product design and development work? And talk a little bit about why that's so top of mind for you.
It's a long topic. I don't think this forum is the right thing to discuss physics over here.
7 seconds. No. So last question, but we'll just go an extra couple minutes.
But I think, let me just park it this way. I think design And art has this amazing ability to create order out of extraordinary disorder that we live otherwise. And it's almost an obligation to make everybody who experiences our product to feel the order from the disorder that we are living in right now. And the disorder is going to be permanent. Everything will break, but it is the obligation through art and design to create order in everything that we do.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Kunal Shah, everybody. Thank you.